This is a Frank podcast.
This Warriors Life podcast 2025, episode 17, brought to you by King's Container Crew, New Zealand TAB and Frank Podcasts. Will Evans, and very pleased today to have a special guest with us, a by-round treat for all of our listeners, former Warriors coach, Matthew Elliott. Welcome, Matthew. Thanks very much for making the time, mate.
Always a pleasure, Will. I'm looking forward to the chat, mate.
So I'm sure Warriors fans are very familiar with you, but Matthew played 62 games in the Fords for St George from 1989 to 92. The last of those being the 92 grand final, lost to the Brisbane Broncos, moved into coaching, firstly at Bradford, 4 years there, including a Super League premiership in 97. Another grand final loss in 99 and a Challenge Cup win in 2000. Head back to Australia with the Raiders, coached first grade coach at the Raiders from 2002 to 06, 4 finals appearances in 5 seasons. Snapped up by Penrith, 5 seasons there, including a second place finish in 2010. And then on to the Warriors for a fairly brief but very memorable stint. Long-time listeners of the podcast would have heard me go on about 2013 that many times, and I guess when you look at the stats and the results, it's probably just a run-of-the-mill season for the Warriors. But I think that mid-season charge that you guys went on, it's outside of the grand final runs that the Warriors went on. That's probably my most memorable or the most sort of emotionally charged I've ever been as a fan, maybe outside of 2023 when we sort of came roaring back again. But that 2013 season always stands out to me, despite the fact that we missed the final. So I'm excited to delve into that a bit with you and just about the Warriors in general and some parts of your career, mate. But I guess more than a decade on in general, how do you sort of reflect on your time living in Auckland as Warriors coach? I mean, it must have been a bit of a whirlwind, only sort of 18 months here.
I loved it, mate. It was a magnificent place to live. I was really lucky. I lived near Mission Bay there and in Okahu Bay. It was just like great place, great people. I really enjoyed the club. I probably didn't, as a coach, perform at a level I would have liked to. There was a few distractions going on with me personally and then obviously around the club. So, but it was it was a time I reflect on, really well.
Just talking about your coaching career in general, you're sort of regarded, I guess at the time, for want of a better term, as a bit of a new age coach, introducing meditation and mindfulness at a time when it wasn't that common, certainly less common than now. I've even heard you say on podcasts that you sort of had trouble trying to shake the reputation of being the weird dude. But how much did that sort of thing influence your coaching, and was it all a bit overblown, or were you just sort of a little bit of ahead of the curve with that sort of stuff?
I don't think I was ahead of the curve at all, to be honest with you. I was just probably new to rugby league. Like, I read a book in 1995 by Phil Jackson, the most winningest coach in NBA history, and that's what kind of sparked my curiosity. And then coming from an academic background in sports science, I knew that downhill skiers, and now nearly 90% of all Olympians do visualization. So I was like, for me initially it was weird, right? So I was really intrigued as to what was going on. So I did all the research behind it and found out it wasn't actually woo-woo at all. Like, I don't know who made sitting with your eyes closed, because when you close your eyes, about 70% of all the distractions that our brains, external distractions that our brains having to take in, disappears, right? It's one of our, and if you can go to a quiet place and get rid of hearing, so it allows you to focus on your craft. So when I looked at what Olympians were doing and I started to do some research, I worked out that it actually wasn't woo-woo. It actually helped high performance. That didn't mean directors of boards and other people understood that and didn't want you investing in it. So it was probably new to it, rugby league, and new to Australia. How about that? Or new to our part of the world.
Did the players respond to it well, though?
In 2009 and 10, I didn't really do it at Canberra at all. In 2009 and 10 at Penrith, they really did, yeah. Um, yeah, as I said, the board of directors weren't really happy with me investing in someone, but the players loved it. And in New Zealand, I did a bit of a different approach. I got a breathing coach called Nam Baldwin. You see everyone breathing at half times, but the guys that were in the 2013 and 2014 squad would have, they'll all understand that Nam was probably the first to come into rugby league, but now he's been at the Roosters, Richmond in AFL, coached the Blues in all those areas. So it's now become a little bit more mainstream, yeah.
Uh, Going through to your time at Penrith, you obviously had that great year in 2010. Didn't go so well in 2011. You were let go by the club. Spent 2012 under your former Dragons coach Brian Smith as an assistant at the Roosters. Then applied for and got the Warriors job for 2013. Now they'd nosedived after the departure of Ivan Cleary, who ironically was your full-time replacement at Penrith. They cut Louis McLennan loose after less than a season. What were your expectations of what the Warriors would be like as a club when you got the job, and what was the reality when you got there?
I mean, I'll be really raw with this. The actual staff at the club were amazing. I thought the way that the club was run, I was really impressed with on an administrative side. As far as football goes, it was a mess. The players were a mess physically. So when I got there, I couldn't believe how unfit they were. So I knew that 2013 was going to be a tough season because we weren't going to be able to sustain them through the whole year because we had to work them hard the whole time in the preseason just to get them in the orbit of being, physically able to actually win games. But the talent, not only in the team, but in New Zealand, there should have to be two teams in New Zealand. I've been saying this for a long time. I was saying it when I was there, but it's not. Talent's overrated. Everyone in the NRL's talented. It's how you develop that talent from, 15, 16, 17. You don't develop them to win competitions at that age. You develop them to be NRL players. And that's what Ivan Cleary's done so well at Penrith, is that they don't teach their young kids. They teach them the language of NRL, all the systems of NRL, and they progressively move their mindset in that direction. And that was what I was really keen to do at the Warriors. And that was going to take a while. But as I said earlier on, my performance, I got a little distracted by whole of club stuff and then some things that were going on back here, in Australia with myself personally. But the opportunity for the Warriors to be one of the top 3-4 clubs consistently in the NRL, I believe exists.
Looking at your start, the team start under your coaching in 2013, it was a tough one. Remember it very well as a fan. 2 wins from the first 10 rounds, culminating in a 62-6 loss at Penrith. That loss was sort of emphasised, I guess, by the fact it was Cleary's Panthers, and he was our ex-coach that a lot of people thought we shouldn't have let go. Do you think that sort of start was, more or less a result of having to work the team so hard in the off season to get them back in condition?
I remember telling the owner and the CEO that it's going to be a tough start to the season because they were, we had players 10 kilos overweight. And I'm not exaggerating, at the start of preseason, I was shocked. So I knew, I've got enough understanding of sports science to know that if you're going to work players that hard, and everyone thinks that's all you do in preseason is flog them, you got to get them to a really high level of strength and fitness and be able to taper it off at the right level so that you can, put some more work into them at the back end of the season. So I knew the start of the season was going to be a really tough one because they were going to go in there fatigued. And that was probably more to do with the expectations set on them going out of the season before.
Now I'm going to get on to my favourite pocket of Warriors history, and I'm going to go through the results one by one. So I'm not sure if you have the same sort of memory of it as me, but I'm going to run through the results. So a week after that loss at Penrith, bounced back with a great win over Wayne Bennett's Knights at home. Then smashed the Broncos 56-18. I was living in Brisbane at the time and sitting in the stands on a Monday night and absolutely loving it. Some unbelievable tries that night. Then a week later, well, the next 2 weeks, beat Manly at home, and then the Roosters in Sydney. Those two teams went on to play in the grand final, especially that win over the Roosters. So memorable. Sean Johnson running down Michael Jennings, runaway tries for the Fish and Manu Vatuvei, and Sonny Bill was in that Roosters team. Just such a great game. Another win over the Broncos. I think it might have been Conrad Hurrell running away for the winner in that one late at home. A really memorable. The only loss in that streak of 8 games was to Souths in Perth. Now, a really memorable game. We actually thought we were going to go on and win that one, up 13-6. Conrad steamrolling Greg Inglis, and just a few things went against him. Then won the next 2. A great win over the Tigers at Leichhardt. Then Melbourne at home, which was a fantastic, memorable win as well. What was the secret to that turnaround? Was it just, the conditioning sort of came right, or was it just one of those things where you have such a rock bottom loss and you sort of, have an honesty session and turn it around? And I guess my follow-up question is, did you think you could win the comp potentially when you were in the midst of that run?
I really thought we could make the semi-finals, and when we're in the midst of that run, there's no doubt about that, Will. And I guess, the Penrith loss allowed me to get everyone's attention. I do remember the meeting, but the victories that followed in that run of games, and that South one still gnaws at me a little bit, I've got to admit. Mind you, it was a tough, the difference from playing in Auckland and Perth and the time zone impacts, I could see that on the playing group as well. But in that, coming out of that meeting, it was more about, why don't you use it, the talent, the ability, and the connection that you've got. We were looking outside to find answers, and all the answers were in that room. It was, they were an amazing group of players, and there was, in that time frame, there was evidence that we certainly could have gone all the way to the grand final for mine. It was just a group that was easily distracted. So, easily distracted in the positive direction. But when we came out of that, that series of wins, they just got distracted away by external dialogue around, can we make it, will we make it, and all that sort of stuff, rather than just keep doing what we were doing. And we had a couple of injuries as well to key players that made a fairly big difference.
A couple of tough losses sort of disrupted that momentum, and obviously just had to keep winning after that slow start. Still a mathematical chance of making the finals going into the last round, albeit a fairly slim one, and did miss out. Still, there's that win late in the season against Canberra at home, where Manu and Sean Johnson both got those hat tricks in less than 10 minutes each. With that sort of positive mid-season run and some good results late in the season, how was the mood heading into that off-season? Was there sort of a feeling that, obviously we didn't get it right at the start of the season, but we've shown what we can do. We've beaten all the best teams. 2014 could be our year. Is that how it felt going to the summer?
Absolutely. And, everyone showed up in better nick. So, we were... there was the foundation there, definitely, that I thought we were going to have a really positive start. The start wasn't that negative. I think when I left, we were 2 and 3. But, again, this is where I got to take responsibility. I started putting my attention into whole of club development rather than the team. That's not my job. I was doing stuff that wasn't my job. And what happens with that is that when with any young person, when you put your attention somewhere else, the relationships then become not as close. They become compromised. And, I take full responsibility for that, my attention was not where it should have been. It shouldn't have been on developing pathways. It shouldn't have been on, I certainly wanted to be consulted about it, but it wasn't for me to do it. It was for other people to get my direction to do it. But I fully admit that. I let the club down and the playing group down there a bit, for sure.
Even with that being the case, I mean, it was only 5 rounds into the season. You'd lost the first two, then had a good win in Townsville to get off the mark, and then a big win over the Tigers in Wellington. That loss at Cronulla, which would be your last match as coach, was a bad one. But it's still 5 rounds in the season, as you said, 2 and 3. It's very rare for a club and a coach to part ways that early in the season. So how do you reflect on that decision, I guess, now? And, was the club, do you think, just waiting for a loss of that magnitude to put that into action? Or
Well, I'll declare this now. I don't know if I've ever spoken about this before, Will, that Eric Watson and myself had some conversations prior to this about me moving to a role of being non-executive managing director of footy. And this was my mistake again, was I said, well, look, if I get an opportunity to head coach somewhere else, I'm going to go. And the conversation was, well, if you're going to go, you may as well go now. So that was again, but that could sound like, oh, what an awful thing to do to Matt. That's not the truth. Is I was already carrying on like a managing director, and so that was on me, and I said, look, so he said, so that's what was behind that decision.
obviously reflecting now, you didn't have another NRL head coaching job after that, and Andrew McFadden ended up, despite not making the finals, proving a good young coach, and he was obviously your assistant and took over the club in fairly difficult circumstances and did very well, particularly that first year. Looking back, do you sort of wish you had maybe tried to transition into that managing director role, but without the coaching?
It's a really good question, Will. And again, as I said, I had some stuff going on at home. When you're separated from family, that's not always an easy thing to do. And so I was distracted. And obviously people were aware of it. And my relationship with the players had been compromised because of those distractions. Now, they didn't notice it, but I did, and I probably noticed it in retrospect. So I was in denial a little bit. Would have I loved to have done that role as non-executive managing director? I would have loved, and I would love to see the Warriors become a force. I lived opposite a park which was full every weekend of just people playing sport. Used to drive me crazy. I used to tell them, surely it's 9 o'clock, you can go home now. It's 9 o'clock at night. So the amount of talent in New Zealand to excel in rugby league is there. It just needs to be developed. I'm not overestimating that at all. But the development and the pathways that existed when I was there were substandard times 1,000, weren't up to scratch. So they could win under 20s comps, right? When the under 20s comp was in there. Why didn't that transition into, dominating everything? Because it was the way that players weren't being developed. And, if you get hold of, 15 to 16-year-olds and start doing what they do at Penrith, I'm telling you that you guys would be sick of having to pay for flights to grand finals.
A very nice problem to have, mate. A touch of irony there that sort of Andrew McFadden is more or less in that sort of role of head of football and development pathways and all that sort of thing now. You speak of that NYC dominance, and you sort of brought along a lot of those star players from those under 20 premiership winning teams. I'd say you got the best out of enigmatic talents like Conrad Harrell, Glenn Fisiahi. Sean Johnson had a great year in 2013, despite you hooking him at Penrith that night. He went on to have a very good year that year. Kevin Locke was sensational in 2013. Feleti Mateo. I thought that Manu Vatuvei had close to his best year. You debuted Nani Laumape at 20 and Suai Matangi, who's just a wonderful story. Was it sort of difficult to harness those kind of talents as a coach, and especially when so many of them in the same team?
No, they just needed time, and that's what I neglected to do on a particularly when we went into 2014. They needed time, and they were good learners. they wanted to contribute. There was some dysfunctional behaviour going on in the background that I didn't know. That again is just something that it's all about what they should have learnt when they were 16, 17, about if you want to be a professional footy player and you want to make, you want to make grand finals and you want to, make an individual career out of this. There were things that you needed to do in the background that I was unaware of until post my time there. But and we won't go into that, but they're really good. They were good people. In all the playing squad, there were. I can't really give you any people that I didn't really think were not constructive. Some of them weren't doing good things away from footy, but they were really good people and wanted to learn, wanted to win, and were a really tight group.
Just looking at the squad you had in 2013 again, only 7 of those 28 players you used that year had played at another club. In comparison, 11 of the 17 players the Warriors fielded in the first 3 rounds this year had played elsewhere. The effects of COVID obviously still influencing that and what the club went through, but they're heading back towards being a development club again. What do you think the right balance is between sort of homegrown players and imports for a club like the Warriors, based on your experience there?
I'd say this. Let's use another example, Will. Are you familiar with Penrith?
Yeah,
About,
absolutely.
I think their recruitment rate internally is over 80%. I think it's closer to 90 than 80%. And that fluctuates year to year. Explain to me why that couldn't be the case at the Warriors. Give me some explanation as to if the development processes were at the highest level. Explain to me why that's not the case, that the Warriors could be like that.
Yeah, I guess that's the direction they are trying to head down, and obviously with bringing in Harold Matt's SG Ball teams, that's the model they're chasing.
Yeah. And the fact that Andrew Webster has come out of that system, he's going to be aware of it. You don't build it in a year. But the good thing about, because the 16 and the 17-year-olds it's going to be 3 years before they're playing NRL. But if they're, you've got to be patient with this. If they're putting time into them now, coupled with the talent they've got in that NRL side, if they're putting time into them now, I'd be excited, having Andrew Webster, and Andrew McFadden, running that system. I'd be, brimming as to see what the results are going to be.
And obviously you still need to bring in some, key pieces from elsewhere though to make it all fit together. You can't just rely on being able to develop every single player you need.
Always. Yeah, but as I say, Penrith do that. It's not, and it's just about having the right balance. And I think that if you look at recruitment, Penrith it's the biggest rugby league area in the world, but that's not the reason they get so many recruits. There's Parramatta are in that region as well. So it's what they do with them that is the big difference. And have a look at New Zealand. Even if you look at the Auckland area in isolation, but when you look at the whole zone. Come on, am I off with the Pixies, or am I correct in saying that the talent, is just falling out of that place, left, right, and centre? Look how many start in New Zealand, come to Australia, and have successful careers.
Yeah, 100%. Could you see that sort of thing happening out at Penrith? You were there for 5 years. Was there, obviously that sort of potential in the same way that you saw the potential in New Zealand when you were there?
Not at the time. When I was there, before Gus got and again, just to be clear, I'd agreed to go at the end of the season, the season before. It wasn't, I didn't, Gus just came and said, if you're going to go, you may as well leave now. That's the second time I've heard that chat. So, but at the time, Penrith were $40 million in debt. So there were no resources. Gus turned that club around by getting James Packer to co-fund a lot of stuff. And they were the first club with a high performance centre. I had no resources below, the New South Wales Cup team. And even the New South Wales Cup coach was part-time. So there was, could I see it? No, not with a club that was struggling financially as they were. That stuff needs to be resourced, but obviously the outcome of that resourcing is, you get that money back.
I just wanted to ask about playing style and, from your time at the club and probably what we're seeing now. We saw a lot of the trademark Warriors flamboyance in 2013 with so many of those naturally gifted players, so many memorable tries and long range tries. They're probably one of the more conservative and structured teams these days. I mean, we went absolutely nuts for Halasima's try just because it was a try from our own half for a change. Do you think it's a product of the way the NRL's changed in general, or the personnel they've got, or just down to coaching strategy, or just a bit of a combination?
Yeah, all of the above, Will. I think the thing that you need to do with the Warriors is that, and if you looked at that streak that we went on, what we did was we didn't play flamboyant footy. Flamboyant footy was an outcome of defending well and looking after the ball. And when you have that much talent in a team, and someone's you've completed a lot of sets, and someone in the opposition's fatigued, and Sean Johnson's season, there's your answer. So it's and I think Andrew Webster's approach. So the best footy these days, back when I coached, it was structure. Now it's systems. And I know that sounds, what are you talking about? Systems are player really basic foundations of structure, but then looking at counting numbers, seeing who's fatigued, looking for cues. So a quick play of the ball. What's your system when you get that cue? When you look up and you've got numbers, what's your system down the short side? And that's what we were able to start to introduce around what we did in that run of games. And the players run systems, not coaches. Coaches, give you the structure. So that might sound a bit deep, but once we got the players running it and believing it, that's the outcome was that run of games. And you can see Penrith, even though they're struggling at the moment, they believe in their system of play, don't they? Because they just go back to it. They just wear the middle down, and then when there's fatigue, they've got players that can make the right decisions.
The Warriors in 2025, I'm sure you've been taking a little interest in them. What's your take on how they've gone so far, and what's their ceiling this year?
Oh, I think that there's some real exciting stuff going on. Obviously, their spine, they've got a little bit of inexperience there with Metcalf and Harris Tavita. There's a growing combination there. I think Sean's nickel clock start really helps. I was really questioning, why wouldn't you use Roger there? But I was wrong, because I just think that even though Roger's injured at the moment, Sean's has brought. It's not really the flair that he brings. It's just I don't know. He seems to be a really calming influence through that part of the team. And even, I don't know if he talks a lot. He doesn't seem to talk a lot, but he just has that calming influence. So I really like the team. And obviously, Fisher Harris coming into the side. People, I think, get James Fisher Harris really mixed up. They think, oh, he's aggressive and he's out there trying to level people. I disagree. I think he plays with a real intensity, not aggression, but a real intensity that lifts the players around him. He doesn't come flying out of the line that often and try and level people. He's just really intense in contact, and just never is relentless in his desire. You can see that, and I think that's contagious as well. So I like the direction they're going in. It's just going to be interesting to see how some of those younger players coming into the team can lift the performance.
You mentioned our halves, and obviously a lot of scrutiny on Luke Metcalf as a fairly inexperienced NRL player in general, and hasn't played a lot of halfback, certainly not at this level. I want to compare it to a couple of your better seasons as a coach. 2003, you took the Raiders to the top four. You had Jason Croker at 5'8" for most of the year, and and then Brad Drew, a converted hooker, and Mark McClendon is more of a, probably better known as a 5'8" as your halfback. That 2010 season we've talked about at Penrith, finished second with Luke Walsh and Travis Burns, and halves, good players, but far from top tier halves. So, looking at those sort of examples, is that going to be a drawback for the Warriors? Having, obviously we don't have a marquee spine player or halves player, but is it really that necessary?
There's a few answers to that, Will. One, you're very lucky you've got a smart coach. So, it's no one's like, no one can't see how good Luke Metcalf is, his speed. But, when you have a look at, a whole lot of different halves, some of them there's a lot of halves that came from fullback. Look at Melbourne Storm, Jerome Hughes, Cameron Munster, they both started as fullbacks. So it's about having a smart coach to adapt the team around what those strengths are. And I can see that's already happened. Andrew Webster wants Luke Metcalf and Harris Tavita to run the ball because that's what they're best at. That doesn't mean they can't pass, but think run first. And that, if you're coaching against that, that's frightening. Because if I'm coaching against both those players, I'm just encourage them to pass the ball. Don't show them anything. Just get them to pass, and we'll deal with it once they. So I think it's a genuine threat. But you've obviously got to then adapt your team and your structures around that. It's different to what Sean did for them, over the previous 2 years. Who you could just see had really matured into a player that could direct the team as to where they needed to go all the time just to get the best out of them. So, I think it's a real demonstration of very smart coaching.
That's great, and really appreciate your thoughts on our team this year and also during your tenure at the Warriors. I want to talk a little bit about what you're pouring your energy into at the moment. Obviously, you're still involved with the game as a commentator, and you've had other assistant coaching roles and stuff in the interim. But the change room started in 2017, taking the blurb from the website, which is changeroom.info. Merging high performance sport with business leadership to elevate leadership, well-being, culture, and performance. You've got league legends Anthony Minicello, Andrew Ryan, Jeff Hardy, and Mark Hughes involved, along with social and behavioural scientists, leadership gurus, OTs. You've had a book out in 2022, The Change Room, Play the Game of Your Life. You got another one just about to drop, I hear. Tell us a bit about how you came to start the Change Room, how it's evolved, and what you guys do.
I guess, connected to the personal challenges that I had coming out of the Warriors period. And I didn't have an answer to some things. I was never taught about, I was just taught to have a cup of concrete, and harden up. So I didn't really understand what emotional challenges were like. And I knew how I didn't want to feel, which is how I was. So I knew how to get fit. I knew how to develop acclimate because I'd learnt and I'd got fit and I'd helped other people do it. I basically was the installation of high performance approach to helping people feel better, helping people perform better in daily life. Because what I worked out is that if it works for an athlete, it'll work for you. It'll work for a human being. So, and it was just around those principles that, Anthony Minicello basically saved my life in 2012 when I was I had an autoimmune disease when I was at the Roosters, and he wasn't a nutritionist. I got a background in a little bit of my academic background in nutrition, and he started telling me about what I should. And I thought, mate, you got no idea. But then I did some, deeper research into it, and he was right. And this year, I don't know if you saw the story that Cameron Munster did on him, helping him recover. But Minnie's now one of the most sought after nutritionists in Australia, for sports people. And so I just started to bring those people into the business. Nam Baldwin, the breathing guy, spoke about. So we did a lot of stuff in workers' compensation in Australia, New South Wales. for injured workers, particularly psych injuries, which is a really big thing in Australia. And then got to do some work in New Zealand as well, predominantly online. But Ruben Wiki also presented for us in person over there. So just helping people get access to information that we think we don't know about. You know what I mean? A lot of people sit there and go, "Well, I'm not an athlete. I wouldn't breathe like an athlete. I wouldn't learn to sleep like an athlete. I wouldn't learn an athlete's mindset." Why not? Why not? You're a human. And what we found at first, I believed it would work, but now I know it works. You know, we've got results in workplaces like correctional services and hospitals where we've reduced, you know, what's the terminology? Return on investment for our business is over 75 for every dollar you spend for workplaces. So it's been quite inspiring to see how what you learn, you know, through footy, which we were all supposed to be numpties, right? You know, semi-dribblers, but you can't, you know, rugby league players don't even realise that what they get exposed to on a daily basis is actually something that can change other people's lives as well as their life. And it's not just about athletic performance, you know, it's about functionality of a person. So it's been great to be a part of. And, you know, also the people that have got involved in the business are, you know, so much fun to work with.
It's awesome. Again, head to changeroom.info for everything that they do. Also, plenty of resources on there, seminars and programs coming up, and also some a great catalogue of podcasts available out there. I think you might have wrapped that up in 2023, but there's some great podcast episodes that you guys have done as well. So, well worth a look.
Got a couple more coming out. Minnie and I, we've just been.
Nice.
He's been off doing all his stuff, and I've been off doing my stuff. But we're going to start, you know, doing our wellbeing podcast again soon too.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Matthew. It's been a pleasure to talk to you, and obviously, you know, your stint at the Warriors might not have been super successful or super long, but you know, anyone that's been had the most important job at the club has a special place in the club's history, and as I've gone on about so many times, that particular period you're at the club hold that pretty close to my heart as well. So great to have a chat. Hopefully we'll get on another time. Hopefully to talk about a Warriors team that's on the way to potentially winning a premiership, mate.
It'll happen at some stage, Will. But pleasure to be on, mate. And yeah, have a great day.
You too, mate. Thank you very much.
This is a Frank podcast.